You wake to the sound of marble cracking beneath his sandals, the echo of power against silence. The air is thick with myrrh and iron, and the torchlight dances across a floor slick with blood. You see him, the emperor of the known world, cradling what he's destroyed, whispering her name as if sound itself could bring her back. And before we go deeper into this story, take a moment. Wherever you're watching from, let me know in the comments. The Roman Empire once spanned 3 continents, and now, 2,000 years later, we gather across the world to unearth its ghosts together. Tap the like, share where you're tuning in from, because this story, though ancient, still echoes in every corner of power today. The year is 65 AD. The palace on the Palatine Hill glows like a furnace. Inside, the Emperor Nero kneels beside the still body of Poppaea Sabina, his wife, his muse, and now his victim. The room smells of roses and copper. The imperial guards outside shift uneasily, pretending not to hear the sound that moments ago split through the marble halls. A single cry, cut short by a blow. Nero's hands, once known for plucking the strings of the lyre, are now red to the wrist. He stares at them as if they belonged to another creature. "She defied me," he murmurs, though his voice trembles more from disbelief than anger. The physician, summoned too late, kneels beside the corpse. "She carried your child, Caesar," he says softly. But Nero doesn't answer. His eyes are fixed on her face, unmarked, beautiful, eternal. For a moment he convinces himself she still breathes. Outside, Rome burns with midsummer heat. Inside, a different fire has begun, one that will consume the emperor's mind. He refuses burial. He refuses to speak the word dead. He orders the imperial embalmers to preserve her as she was, her body perfumed with cinnamon and cassia, her skin polished with oil and gold dust. "Make her divine," he commands, "so that death cannot touch what belongs to a god." The servants obey. No one dares question madness when it wears a crown. The palace fills with the scent of incense and decay. Days turn into weeks, and still Nero visits her chamber at night, talking to her as though she listens. He orders musicians to play her favorite melodies. He places jewels upon her fingers, rubies upon her lips, as though adorning an idol. The senators whisper, "The emperor has lost his mind," but none dare speak it aloud. In Rome, silence is survival. He walks through the forum like a ghost, his gaze wild, his face pale as carved marble. The people bow, though many avert their eyes. Some say they see him speaking to empty air. Others claim they hear his footsteps echo long after he's gone. Nero begins to stage ceremonies in Poppaea's name, offerings, processions, the burning of perfumes across the city. "She watches us," he declares from the balcony, his voice rising above the crowd. "She has ascended." But ascension requires death, and Nero cannot accept that she has truly left him. His grief mutates into something monstrous, a hunger to remake her, to call her back into the world by any means. Every woman he passes is measured against her memory. "Too pale," he says, "too mortal." His attendants exchange glances. The emperor, it seems, is searching for her reflection. One night, under a blood-orange moon, he walks the halls alone. The frescoes shimmer in torchlight, gods embracing, serpents devouring their tails, the eternal dance of destruction and rebirth. Nero stops before a mirror of polished silver. In its reflection, his face seems both divine and damned. "If I am a god," he whispers, "why can I not command her soul?" The mirror offers no answer, only the hollow echo of his own gaze. When dawn comes, the chambermaids find him seated beside her embalmed body, crown askew, eyes glazed with exhaustion. "She smiled," he says simply. "Did you not see?" None reply. They bow, backing away, and word spreads through the palace. Nero communes with the dead. From the temples to the taverns, Rome hums with rumor. The poets write in veiled metaphors, the senators in fearful silence. The empire itself seems to hold its breath. For an emperor who believes himself divine cannot be questioned. But gods, when they grieve, are the most dangerous of all, and so begins his descent, not into mourning, but into mania. In his madness, Nero commands that statues of Poppaea be raised in every province. He names her Augusta, empress eternal, her likeness molded in ivory and gold. Yet each new image only deepens his torment, for none capture the living warmth of her skin, the curve of her voice, the memory of her gaze. In the dead of night, his court hears him pacing, weeping, whispering her name. And, slowly, a new idea begins to take root in his fevered mind. If the gods could take human form, could not man restore what death had stolen? Outside, thunder rolls over Rome. A storm gathers, dark and heavy, pressing against the domes and columns like a curse waiting to break. In that silence between lightning and rain, Nero's eyes flicker toward the door, as if he already knows who will walk through it next. The boy, the one whose face would make the emperor believe in resurrection. The marble corridors of the Palatine Palace stretched endlessly, cold and gleaming, their silence broken only by the soft drag of a sandal on stone. Somewhere beyond the torchlight the emperor walked, his presence felt before it was seen. And at the far end of that hallway stood a boy named Sporus, thin as a reed, his hands trembling as though even the air were too heavy to hold. Nero stopped before him. The emperor's eyes, ringed in sleepless shadows, flicked over the boy's face with eerie stillness. "Raise your head," he commanded. Sporus obeyed. The moment their gazes met, the palace seemed to exhale. Nero's lips parted, not in anger, but in recognition. "Poppaea," he whispered, the word like a prayer falling into the marble stillness. From that instant, Sporus ceased to exist. No one dared to speak the boy's name again. Within days, whispers rippled through the imperial court. The emperor had seen a vision. He claimed the gods had returned his beloved through mortal flesh. Some called it madness, others divine providence. But in Nero's Rome, belief was not a choice. It was a command. Sporus was taken from the servant quarters to the inner chambers, where the emperor's physicians waited. They spoke in hushed Latin, glancing nervously at the gilded curtains that hid Nero from view. "It must be done," came the voice behind them, low and calm. "The form must match the soul she carries." What followed was not a transformation, but a sacrifice. The boy's cries echoed through the stone halls as the physicians obeyed their orders. When it was over, the palace was silent again, the kind of silence that follows an act that cannot be undone. The next morning, the emperor appeared before his court, radiant in white robes. At his side stood the boy, now dressed in silk, his face powdered pale, his hair coiled in gold. Nero smiled and said only, "Behold, my Poppaea returned to me." The courtiers bowed, their faces masks of obedience. To question was to die, and so the lie became law. Artists were summoned to craft portraits of the reborn empress, capturing the delicate curve of the boy's features, reshaping his likeness to match the dead woman's memory. Musicians composed new hymns in her honor. The palace priests conducted ceremonies of rebirth, burning incense until the air itself seemed to choke. Each morning, Sporus awoke in a chamber that once belonged to Poppaea, her perfumes still lingering, her silks draped across his trembling frame. Tutors taught him her gestures, her voice, her walk. "Softer," they said, "slower. Smile as she smiled." His reflection blurred in the polished bronze mirror before him, as if unsure who it was meant to show. Nero watched every lesson. His eyes glistened with an affection too intense to be human. He would brush a lock of the boy's hair aside and whisper, "You see, even the gods yield to my will. You were never gone." Sporus would nod, voice caught in his throat, trapped between terror and pity. Outside the palace, the people murmured. Some said the emperor had found a witch who conjured Poppaea's spirit. Others swore the boy was an angel. Yet for those who had seen too much, the physicians, the attendants, the painters, the truth was something far darker, a mortal body refashioned to soothe a divine delusion. Rome itself seemed to bend under the weight of Nero's madness. Senators attended feasts where Sporus, veiled in gold, sat beside the emperor as his wife. The pair reclined beneath frescoes of Venus and Mars, while musicians played beneath chandeliers dripping with silver. When Nero lifted his cup and toasted to love eternal, the senators raised their goblets, eyes fixed on the wine, unwilling to meet the boy's hollow stare. Yet there were moments, brief and flickering, when the illusion cracked. Once, during a private banquet, Nero asked Sporus to sing Poppaea's favorite song. The boy's voice trembled as he began, soft and uncertain. For a heartbeat, Nero's expression changed. The melody faltered, the emperor's gaze clouded, and his hand twitched as though struck by memory. "You sang it differently," he muttered. The room froze. Sporus, trembling, whispered, "Forgive me, my lord." Nero only smiled. "No matter," he said. "In time, you will remember." As the months passed, Sporus's reflection became unrecognizable even to himself. In mirrors, he saw the faint ghost of a woman's face where a boy's once had been. He began to dream of Poppaea, not as the emperor's beloved, but as an apparition standing over him, her eyes full of sorrow, her lips whispering a single word, "Run." But there was nowhere left to run. The empire itself had become a theater, its ruler both playwright and god, rewriting flesh and soul alike. The line between memory and madness blurred until no one dared ask where the living ended and the dead began. One night, as rain hissed against the palace roof, Nero stood behind Sporus, studying his reflection in the mirror. "You are perfect," he murmured. "Even she never looked so divine." His hand brushed the boy's shoulder, gentle, almost reverent. But in the reflection, Sporus did not meet his gaze. His eyes drifted beyond the emperor's image to the dark doorway behind them, where something unseen seemed to stir. Nero followed his gaze and froze. For a heartbeat, it seemed the mirror had caught another figure, pale, silent, watching. When he turned, the doorway was empty. But, in that silence, deep in the corridors of the Palatine Palace, the echo of a woman's laughter drifted faintly through the dark. The streets of Rome roared with music, but the sound was hollow. Drums beaten by trembling hands, flutes played through forced smiles. The imperial wedding procession moved through clouds of incense, gold confetti, and the collective lie of an empire. The bride, veiled in shimmering silk, walked beside the emperor, her hand shaking ever so slightly in his. Beneath that veil was not an empress reborn, but the boy who had once been Sporus, now a living monument to Nero's delusion. The people chanted, "Ave Caesar! Ave Poppaea!" Their voices rose like a tide, yet every word carried the weight of fear. The senators bowed, the priests blessed, the courtiers smiled until their faces ached. They all saw the trembling beneath the veil, but none dared to speak of it. To see what stood before them was to risk treason, to admit that Rome itself had been ensnared in its ruler's madness. At the steps of the Capitol, Nero raised his bride's hand high. The sun struck the gold fabric, and for an instant, the illusion was complete. The empire's lost goddess had returned. He leaned close, whispering, "Do you hear them, my love? Even the gods envy us." The boy nodded, voice trapped in his throat. His heart thudded against the silks that suffocated him. Inside the palace, the celebration stretched into night. Goblets of wine spilled across marble floors. Dancers twirled beneath chandeliers, their movements blurred by exhaustion and fear. The emperor sang, his voice trembling with the self-assuredness of a god who demanded applause. And beside him, silent and still, sat Sporus, the empress, eyes glazed beneath the golden veil. He no longer wept. He no longer dreamed. The boy had been replaced by ritual. Each smile, each gesture, each word rehearsed to perfection. Even his body no longer belonged to him. When Nero leaned close, brushing his lips against the veil, Sporus did not flinch. There was no longer anyone left inside to flinch. But even emperors cannot command eternity. Within 3 years, Rome turned against its self-proclaimed god. The Senate rebelled. The Praetorian Guard deserted. Nero fled through the dark streets he once ruled, clutching the very hand that had trembled beside him at the wedding. "They betray me," he whispered to Sporus, voice cracked and wild. "Do they not know who I am?" Sporus said nothing. He had learned that silence was the only safe language. When Nero died by his own blade, whispering, "Qualis artifex pareo," what an artist dies in me, Rome did not mourn. The empire exhaled as if waking from a fever dream. Yet for Sporus, there was no awakening. Freedom did not return with Nero's death. It merely changed its face. After the emperor's fall, the boy became a relic, passed from one ruler to another, a curiosity from a darker age. Otho, Nero's former ally and briefly his successor, claimed him next. In some strange twist of loyalty or cruelty, Otho treated Sporus as Nero once had, dressing him in jewels, calling him by the empress's name. Perhaps it was devotion, or perhaps it was mockery, a living reminder that even gods die. Then came Vitellius. Where Nero had worshipped his illusion, Vitellius humiliated it. In drunken revels he summoned Sporus to perform before guests, parading him as the widow of the god. Laughter echoed through the banquet hall as Sporus, veiled and trembling, reenacted the wedding he had never chosen. The emperor's jest cut deep, the kind of laughter that leaves a scar. After that night, Sporus disappeared from the feasts. His chamber remained lit for days, though no sound came from within. Those who passed by claimed to hear whispers through the door, fragments of prayers, fragments of memories. "Who am I?" one voice asked, "if I am not her?" When they found him, he was seated by a bronze mirror, his reflection dim in the candlelight. A vial of poison lay open beside him. The silks he once wore now hung loose upon his shoulders, their gold dulled with age and tears. He raised the vial in trembling fingers, murmuring something only the dead could hear. And as the candle's flame flickered out, so too did the last breath of the boy who had been forced to become a goddess. In the years that followed, Rome buried his story beneath the rubble of Nero's palace. The marble cracked, the frescoes faded, and ivy crept over the ruins of the once golden halls. But sometimes when the wind swept through those hollow corridors, travelers claimed to hear faint music, a lyre strumming somewhere in the dark, a voice calling a name that no longer belonged to the living. And if you stood before one of those ancient mirrors long enough, they said, you might glimpse a pale figure just beyond your shoulder, veiled in gold, eyes hollow, lips whispering a question that has haunted empires ever since. What becomes of a soul when even death is denied to it?